Hi, this is Peggy from Roar. Today our guest is Petia Tchouk from Mars Discovery District. So Petia is in charge of partnership development focusing on fintech. So thank you so much, Petia, for being with us today. I know we're going to have a great and fun conversation. Do you want to give us maybe a few words on what you're doing at Mars before we dig in?
Great. Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you today. So my role at Mars is all about building up the fintech ecosystem. So helping all of our startups, our ventures connect to each other and then connect out to customers, to regulators, the whole universe of other stakeholders. What we really want to do at Mars is build up a great fintech ecosystem that brings all these players together. And it's my job to facilitate that.
Oh, that's amazing. So the first question I have for you is, what do you think would be some of the lasting impacts of COVID on the financial services industry?
Yeah. I think COVID in a lot of ways is accelerating the change that was already happening. I think consumers were already wanting more services to be digital under COVID. Both small and large institutions had no choice but to make that happen. So I think it's just speeding up things that were going on anyway. I think it's creating a challenge for the employees of financial institutions because there's a lot of functions that previously had to happen in the office for privacy, for security reasons, because that was just the habit. And so I think it's going to be and has been a real struggle to figure out how to do those things in just as secure, just as private a way while, letting people work from home. And I think that's a challenge that's still being worked through. And then I think there's a little bit of just really thinking about the impacts on people's lives. So the financial services industry, I think more than any other, really reflects what's happening in people's lives. So as we see people struggling with financial hardships, as we see people sort of thinking about what am I going to do with a home purchase, how do I afford it, all of that stuff rolls out into the financial landscape. And so there's a lot of, I think over the next 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, we're going to see those life impacts play out in the services that people want, as well as the way that they want to interact with financial institutions. Yeah. So a lot has already changed and a lot more to come.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to make that connection with the daily lives of the clients. In the last few years, it's been very interesting that the conversations was mainly on technology. As a client, you're not interested by the technology. You want your financial institution to help you with your wellness, your financial wellness. And I think the benefit from the crisis is to go back to these basics, as you just mentioned. So thank you for pointing that out. In terms of regulations and policy, do you see some changes happening in the space? Obviously, open banking is a thing that when I speak with Canadians come up because we're a bit late to the party, or anything else that you have on your radar that you believe is gonna be impacting and changing.
Financial Services Regulatory Authority has sort of a new innovation team that's doing lots of consultations. So the regulators, even before COVID, were already thinking about technology is changing, the world is changing, how do we keep up, how do we regulate in a more nimble way? And I think that's going to continue to be a thing. I don't know if COVID is speeding things up or just making it harder because it's harder to get work done with everyone distracted with a lot of other pressures. I think one of the things that's going to be interesting is to see how COVID changes consumers' expectations. So on the one hand, as we were saying, so there's this push for more digital. On the other hand, we kind of know that Canadians really like stability and certainty. And so it'll be interesting for me to see if the long-term impact of this is people saying we really, really need a more stable financial system. And so pushing towards sort of larger, more established institutions, or whether the push will instead be to say we need it so digital and so nimble and push towards sort of smaller fintechs that are doing different things. So part of it is just that the regulators are trying, but we also have to see how people's psychology plays out and what direction they lean in response to these challenging couple of months.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I do believe as well that you always have this fly for safety when things are unstable. So I do think that benefits large financial institutions in that context, especially probably more in Canada where people are conservative and happy with their banks, like compared to many countries in the developed world. Canadians actually love their banks. So very less of an impediment to change.
And it might actually be that there's some fintechs, and I think Wealthsimple is a good example, that at this point they've become so established and they've had a chance to establish themselves that maybe they will become the ones that are seen as the stable institutions.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of, it's even within that drive for stability, what we think of as a stable, trusted organization may change.
Well, and Wealthsimple is an interesting example because they're owned by Power Corp. So you're not in the same, which I'm sure clients probably don't know anyway, but you're in that situation where you're still backed by such a large organizations that the risks are also a bit more minimized than some companies I might have done business with. In terms of macro perspective, what do you see in terms of impacts on the global financial stability order? So obviously we're going to have way more sovereign debt at some point. We're going to have to pay for that. That's usually the way it goes, unfortunately. Potential inflation, the relationship between China, US, Canada in the middle of that. Any perspective, any insights on that?
Yeah, it's so complex. And it's interesting because I think in Canada, we've certainly felt the COVID impact, but there's also been a lot of support. So I think the full economic impact is still sort of 6 months or 12 months down the road. So even from judging from sort of my and our day-to-day life, it's sort of hard to see how that will play out. And I know that there are many countries that have been hit a lot harder, that are experiencing much firmer recessions. My training originally was as a political scientist. And so that's kind of the brain that switches on when I look at this situation. And we sort of know historically that anytime there's widening inequality, anytime there's economic upset, anytime people feel like the government cannot fill that gap, then there's going to be pressure for political change. And so I think it's inevitable that that will come, and it's just going to be a question of how much the pressure builds up, how long it takes for that to play out. But I think we're already sort of seeing hints of people saying, universal basic income was never going to be accepted, but now they're open to it. And so like every great crisis from sort of the Black Death to the World Wars, anything that really shakes society makes people rethink what they want from their government and from each other. And so again, that political scientist hat is saying absolutely something's going to change, but I don't have enough of a crystal ball to know in what direction that will go.
Well, what's very interesting in your point is that it's already playing out in the US big time, and speaking more and more in Canada, people are telling me, well, we're afraid of a contagion from what's happening, even if we don't face the same challenges in Canada than in the US. So, being from France, we're coming from a place where we had the basic income for like 30 years, I think. So it's something that for me is a bit of a no-brainer. But I realize that North America comes from a different perspective. But at the same time, we've had unrest for 20 years as well. So it's interesting to look at that and see, okay, what is the direction can go anywhere, and you add to that the impact of climate change and natural catastrophe that will just amplify, from my perspective, these inequalities and crises. We tend to look at our little world as like, okay, we're North American, we're European, but climate change in some areas create famines, create wars, create like things we tend to discount here. So it's going to be an interesting 10, 15, 20 years. I hope the crisis is going to make us awaken up to changes, good changes. And the basic income in North America is, from my perspective, one of them.
And it is all going to come together. And I think as we start seeing climate migration, we know that huge waves of migration changes the countries they come into, sometimes in really positive ways, sometimes in ways that are sort of tumultuous as they get digested. And so whether it's COVID, whether it's climate, whether it's just people wanting different things in terms of how they relate to each other, how we deal with race relations and gender relations, it's a lot of change happening. So it's interesting to see where it all goes.
Yeah, exactly. So coming back down to micro or down to earth, in terms of resetting the competitive positioning in the financial services industry, so you work with the entire ecosystem. we spoke a little bit about the potential flight to safety to large FIs or large fintech. What's your thoughts really focusing on this competitive positioning?
Yeah, one thing that's been really delightful and encouraging for me over the last few months is talking to our startups across Canada who are seeing their business tick up, who are seeing an increase of interest and demand for them. And it's folks that work in, digital identity. It's ones that are creating new marketing tools, so better ways to connect with consumers in a virtual world or to connect with consumers and employees working from home. There's always a demand for corporate productivity sort of tools, for making better use of data, for gaining value out of data. And all of these companies have just been seeing a great bump in their business over the last 6 months. And to me, that's really sort of the encouraging, the good news story out of it is that some really sharp Canadian fintechs that deliver all of these services are seeing their value getting recognized. And I think sitting behind all that, this is happening before COVID, but there's all these platform technologies that are changing as well. I think something's been interesting over the last 5 years to see AI go from this really hyped thing to sort of like a background standard for a lot of companies, to see people now starting to talk about what happens with 5G, what happens with quantum, to see these new technologies come in a world beyond COVID. I think there's a lot of space for creativity and optimism about what new things are going to be sort of spaces where companies are competing to be the very best provider of digital onboarding tools or the very best provider of know your customer tools. And there's some really fantastic ones out there.
And obviously, some of these business models are B2C, sorry, some are B2B. So if I go to the financial institution side and I look at their digital transformation, which has been ongoing, it's like giving birth that never comes, like it's been like 10 years of that. So so what do you see in terms of transformation in traditional financial institutions?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the same things. It's the large financial institutions trying to improve the customer experience. I think, as I mentioned at the start, the piece that I'm not sure that anyone has really worked out is how to support employees in a way that will make working from home a little more bearable. That's the piece that hasn't been worked out. But I think what I'm most curious about is seeing how all those consumer trends we're talking about will force the big financial institutions to change. I think so far, the last 6 months, I've seen an uptick in banks really being very hungry for innovation. But to my mind, the best way to be innovative and to move forward is to partner with really creative startups. But that's very hard work. And so I wouldn't be surprised, and it's no easier in a digital world, so I wouldn't be surprised if sort of this uptake we've seen over the last 6 months goes down a little bit as the large financial institutions process and adapt and absorb everything that they've been struggling to do over the last few months. So it's been this encouraging, I think, uptick towards digital transformation. There'll be a period of absorption, and then hopefully once those things get leveled out, we'll see more appetite for change.
Yeah, it's a tough time, because you end up in that situation with low interest rate that's going to be, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
We're going to see, I absolutely agree with you, it's going to take 6 months, a year to really shake up in terms of the losses. I do believe, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of bankruptcies, personal businesses, the bank's going to eat, the losses on that. So
Absolutely.
all the digital transformation work that could and should have probably happened 5-10 years ago. Now it's like, okay, I have absolutely no space to turn because my bottom line is absolutely squished, but I absolutely need to transform faster than ever. So, and maybe that's the situation that was the burning platform that was needed for things to actually change, like sometimes to your point, you need this tension, this friction. Any perspective on that? I know you work as well with large FI. Do you see this? Because I hear reorgs, and I'm like, okay, on one end you're trying to save costs, and on the other end you need to engage, obviously, budget to be able to transform. So it's a tough one.
And that's the challenge that I've been hearing from the larger institutions that we work with, that I mean, it's always true that sort of for creativity, people need a little bit of safe space and some freedom to make mistakes. And suddenly in a place where the budget lines are really hard and everyone is really fighting over budget, it's harder to be the one who takes the risks and says, let me try out this platform. Let's put a lot of effort into running this proof of concept when we don't know what's going to happen. So I think what that means for the banks is a harder time figuring out and having space for experimentation as well as that drive. But for startups, what that really means is they have to be crystal clear on their value. They have to have some really solid metrics that say, this is how I will improve your revenue, improve your costs, save your bottom line, and to really be able to give their large partners a little more comfort that that startup understands that challenge and can be sort of very certain of delivering the benefits that they promise. So it's not just the large banks that have a role to play in that, it's the startups in the way that they're presenting their solutions as well. And everyone's really struggling, but hopefully that push between needing to get things done and needing to spare your budget will leave some space for a little bit of burning platform creative thinking.
You're absolutely right. So last question. So during the last 6 months, did you take new habits? And I'm not referring to paintball, but and that is it's a previous conversation of the record. Good or bad habits you picked up during this last 6 months that you might want to share?
Yeah, I think like everyone else, I have days when I really like working from home because I find it so productive, and days where I'm like, oh, how am I productive without people around me to work in that space? So it's a challenge. One of the things I found really delightful in my ecosystem role is that events that we might have run in person for a small audience, when they go online, it's suddenly really easy to get a bigger audience and a global audience. So this summer, I've been running a lot of demo days where you have some companies come out and pitch and talk about their solution and what the value is. And we've been able to get 120 people watching the sessions live, another 100 getting a recording. And there's people in that virtual room from New York, from Hong Kong, from Germany, from Brazil. And so in all of these COVID challenges, part of me really likes the fact that the playing field is a little bit leveled. And I know that sort of from my work and trade, Canadian companies tend to go to the US and not necessarily feel as comfortable going abroad. And some of that is the logistical challenges and just the distance and how hard it is to feel like you're really physically present in London enough to build a network. And under COVID, when it's all virtual, suddenly that playing field is very level. And so Canadian companies, in a certain sense, have a leg up competing in France, in Germany, in Hong Kong, because if it's all on Zoom anyway, then, you know, other than the time difference, it's kind of okay. So as much as it's sort of been a mixed experience of productivity and not productivity, it's also opened the door in a really interesting way to trying to be a little bit more global and a little more inclusive in what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have exactly the same perception. You know, I reached out to way more people who are, you know, abroad, Europe, even in the US, that in the past it would have been, you know, give me a call when you're in the city. And well, obviously when I'm in the city, you're not. So, you know, there's no way we're ever going to chat. But, you know, to your point also, I have days where I'm like, oh my God, you know, like I did like these great things. And day after, like, oh my God, I'm just wasting my time. I'm such a drain. Yeah. So I can relate. Well, Petia, thank you so much for taking
you.
It was not only extremely insightful, but really lovely to chat with you. I really always enjoy our conversation. You're super knowledgeable. I really like that. So thank you so much again, and
it's been really lovely.
Enjoy the paintball the weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Have a good one.
bye.